Thanks, Sebastian, for the invitation. I'm excited to be here today to talk about the Common Workflow Language and also about its provenance story with CWLProv and how that's turning into the WorkflowRun RO-Crate profile. Feel free to use these slides in other places. So a little bit about me. I work for both ELIXIR Netherlands and ELIXIR Germany. I'm also the project leader for the Common Workflow Language project. And I've been also helping out the Workflow Community Initiative, which is a global effort to unite scientific workflow computing efforts across domains around the world. And I'm based in Berlin since 2018, and I'm excited to be staying here for a long time. So the background, of course, to the Common Workflow Language is that when we started way back when, there were no standards for describing command line tools and the workflows made from them. There were many workflow systems, and still more have been created in the meantime, but you kind of got stuck in one system. Now, if that system was Galaxy, you were stuck in a good place, but sadly, people didn't agree to all just use Galaxy. So we wanted to have a standard so that that effort to describe those complicated command line tools we find in bioinformatics and life science data analysis, so we could capture that complexity and make it useful in multiple situations, multiple different platforms, so we can share where it makes sense and do things differently where that makes sense. I think that's a philosophy that's really important to me. We'll see this come up later. So we went and made a standard. We started at the Bioinformatics Open Source Conference, CodeFast, in 2014. So we do deliver that standard. It comes with a schema. There are user guides and tutorials and conformance tests, because we want to make sure that when people say they implement the CWL standard, 1.2, do they implement all of it and help enable that interoperability and portability there. We did come from bioinformatics initially, but we took effort to not make it bioinformatics specific, and now CWL is used in all sorts of domains that have a similar type of workflow. That is, it's made up of command line tools. Where there are some domains that everybody writes in the same language, so you're not coordinating between different programming languages. In those cases, you might see use of a particular framework or library. But in life sciences, we love all the programming languages, so we have to coordinate typically at the command line interface level. So there are two standards. There's that command line tool description standard. How do we, what are the inputs you need to run a particular program? What file formats there are optionally? How do we take those inputs and put them on the command line? Maybe what container we should use, or here's a name of the program so we can find a conda package or some other way of getting it installed. And the other standard is the workflow description standard, which is taking those command line tools and connecting them together to form the workflow. And just about the CWL project itself, it is owned by the Software Freedom Conservancy, US-based public interest charity. And so the project itself is interested in through its obligation to serve the public, help with the pre-standardization process, making the standard itself, and doing the follow-up training and getting ready for the next cycle. So something about our values and how we work. And a little bit about the timeline. I think what's more recently interesting is perhaps the paper that we got out last year, featuring many ELIXIR members and the entire CWL community. And if you want to learn more about CWL and its overall goal and what it's done, this is a great introduction to that, if I may say so myself. Right now, I'm writing a deep technical dive to answer all the technical questions one might have about the language choices, and also doing a head-to-head comparison with some other languages that are not so standardized, but people ask about a lot. I'm always happy to answer questions. And I think we actually have quite a lot of time today overall, so feel free to raise hands, or if I don't see something in chat, maybe Sebastian will need to interrupt and bring my attention to something. I don't know how much I want to go into technical details of CWL, because I believe there's an interest to talk about provenance. But these slides are here. We can come back to them if there's some specific questions. But one takeaway we want people to have, if they've never seen CWL themselves, is that you can write CWL in a very simple way to begin with, and then you can build it up as you need more documentation or more complexity, or you want to provide additional features. So these here on this side, it's really just to give that takeaway that they describe the same tool, but you can kind of add these extra features later as you need them. Sometimes people see, CWL descriptions have been worked on for months or years, and they look very complicated and hard to understand. But I assure you that each and every one of those started out as a very simple description that just grew over time. So I'm going to skip some of these details, but I do want to say from the beginning, due much in part to the involvement of Carol Goebel and Stephen Reyes, CWL has thought about its object model and looked toward to be compatible with different ways of recording provenance. And ELIXIR, we care about provenance for a variety of reasons. We care because we want to be good about attribution, who did what resources were used, who wrote the tool, who wrote the workflow. We also care about tracing back what data was used to make this particular output. That could be for reproducibility, reusability, and also for troubleshooting reasons. Something didn't go wrong correctly, provenance helps us trace that. In CWL itself, the standards speak nothing of provenance, but the underlying data model made that pretty easy. We got a lot of requests to do provenance. So we did create CWLProv that got published in 2019, which was sort of a recipe for taking existing provenance standards and how you might represent what's called the workflow level provenance. Here is a workflow. We ran it with this runner. This step started at that time, and this is what happened. Here was the container that was used. Another aspect of provenance that really can matter is inner provenance, what's happening within a tool. Sometimes we want detail about what's happening within the tool. Sometimes we might not want it. So there can be a lot of different levels of detail one can have. And a common experience people have, including myself when I first started looking at provenance, is to be overwhelmed, both with the number of standards out there, but also some provenance techniques produce way too much information, and it can be very overwhelming. And the ELIXIR, as I thought about preparing the slides and talking to Sebastian earlier, because I don't know the plant community so well, and in fact, I'm pretty sure it's made of many different communities, I invite all of you to go on your own provenance journey. And that journey will be a bit different for each little community. Different communities are going to care about tracking different pieces of information. If you're feeling kind of like, well, you need to do provenance, or you've had some past experiences where I wish we had recorded that better. I really recommend that you take the time as you start your provenance journey to really record what questions might you want to ask of your provenance later. If we were really organized, we kept all the details, we didn't lose track of how research was done over time, and we went from this system to that system, we kept all that information. What information might you want to ask about a published piece of data, or your own data from 6 months ago, or something from a database? And developing those questions will help you evaluate the different provenance resources out there. Maybe workflow level provenance is good enough. Just knowing a tool is run and which data was used and which version, maybe that's enough. But maybe you also need deeper provenance. Maybe you interact with databases a lot, right? And you need to really record when that database was accessed, which your workflow level provenance may not capture, right? Maybe your tools have different modalities that may not be obvious from looking at the command line application. Maybe the tool makes some choices about what to do based on the data and the configuration. And so therefore, you might need to record that inner provenance. The tool itself needs to kind of share somehow what some of the choices it made in a structured way. And that's an area I think is a lot is happening there. I think it's quite ripe for some interesting projects. So if that's of interest to you, I've got a couple prototypes going on, and I'm happy to connect people with others looking at maybe how do we better capture inner provenance and connect those with the workflow level. So there's some sort of needs to be a standardized handoff there. We don't have that solution today, but I think we have some ideas. We'll see what's happening. So CWLProv came out in 2018. It's based on the research object bundle. Research objects have progressed and merged with another effort called crates. So now we have RO crates. And now being developed is the WorkflowRun RO crate. Some basic notes on this. And I'm really excited about RO crates. I'm a big fan. This is how we're going to solve that problem of the fact that researchers interact with different systems. They're going to do manual analysis. They're going to use interactive notebooks. They're going to use workflow systems. And we need to be able to keep that thread moving through all those different modes of analysis, and so that we can connect the provenance that's recorded. So, and even they might use CWL as their workflow language, right? So we can't use CWLProv for all workflow stuff. So WorkflowRun, the WorkflowRun profile for AutoCrate will replace CWLProv. We're just making sure it has all the features that we had in CWLProv. And so you'll see that in the future. But there's a converter. So today, if you've got some CWLProv research object bundles, those can be converted to the WorkflowRun AutoCrate profile. And I forgot the links in the slide. I will try to add that back in later today. So I wanted to give, I can also talk more about CWL. I can talk a bit more about the provenance, but maybe I can take a moment to see what sort of questions this particular group has to steer the conversation.
Well, I might jump in with the first question that I was about to put in the chat, but since it's the right moment, about this very slide. So you're saying that for workflow execution, the WorkflowRun profile will replace CWLProv that itself encapsulate or take advantage of the Prov ontology and so on. So is this going to be only for the running or workflow or for any type of provenance? This is what is not fully clear for me. Sorry.
Sure. So the WorkflowRun profile being developed for AutoCrate is for any workflow system. So any workflow system could choose to express what they've done there. And I'm so sorry for not having the link. I will put that in here maybe when the talk is done, where you can see the vocabularies used. And you can always include extra stuff. So if you've got a preferred provenance encoding, you can include that as an additional item in your RO crate. You'll just still represent the common elements, the requested elements of the WorkflowRun profile in the way that that was requested. There's a lot of use of schema.org, but it's definitely Prov influenced as well. And I don't necessarily work so much on that on the profile itself, so I don't want to misspeak and say it is using X, Y, and Z vocabulary. So I don't want to cause a problem there. Definitely, I believe Prov is involved. I would be pretty surprised if not. But the effort with the WorkflowRun profile is just to give out those high-level common details, but also making sure it's not specific to CWL for workflow systems that are not CWL-based.
Okay.
There are other RO-Crate profiles that would also have a provenance component. And that's, you know, there's the base profile and there's some other ones. There's a separate profile for a prospective execution. So here's a workflow you could run. This is for, you know, retrospective. We did run this workflow. Here's the output and here's what actually happened during the execution of that workflow.
Okay. Because the use case I've got in mind is something that we discussed during the last biohackathon with Philippe Roccassera. And during that biohackathon, we came to the conclusion first that AeroCrate, MyAPI, so the standard for plant phenotyping and beyond experimentation exchange of data, and AeroCrate, all those three standards has to work together. And the idea is that there is already an ISA flavor or a MyAPI flavor of ISATab. Okay, very good. ISATab or ISAJSON. And that AeroCrate will encapsulate this ISA. whether it's plain old ISA or ISA MyAPI. Okay. But in MyAPI, we've got the problem of provenance, but in a very simple way. It's not a question of workflow. It's a question that the plant researcher will have, I don't know, 4 or 5 files, CSV file of measures, direct measures. And on that, they will execute a statistic R script, an agronomical model, something rather, well, I was about to say simple, but it can be rather complicated. And it will produce 1 or 2 files as output. The provenance that we absolutely want to keep is that I've got 4 files, I've done that statistic or that R script in that version with those parameters, and I've produced this output file. And if it's not automated, it's perfectly fine with us, as long as we've got a standard way to represent this. So during the biohackathon, we say, okay, what about embedding in ISA a CWL file to represent this? It seems promising. I haven't played with it yet. I don't know if anybody has begun to play with it. So when I see this sentence, I say, okay, hold on. Should we embed in ISA a CWLProv file or a WorkflowRun AeroCrate profile? Knowing that from my understanding of AeroCrate,
I missed that last bit you said. You asked, should we put an AeroCrate in ISA or something? And then I missed after that.
Okay, so we've got this simple, very simple provenance use case, which is purely descriptive. We want to put it in an ISA archive, so ISA tab, ISA JSON, whatever. Should we go to CWLProv, which has the advantage of readability for plant researchers, or should we go to WorkflowRun profile, which might be more powerful, but possibly from a very far point of view, possibly more complicated to explain. Of course, those who have some ideas, I think about Daniel around or Sebastian, if you've got things you want to add to my description of the dilemma, please feel free to.
So people find, I mean, one of the reasons for AeroCrate over the older research object bundle is it actually simpler. It's simpler to implement, and I find it easier to read. So I think what I'm hearing is there could be a community-specific AeroCrate profile that says, well, there should always be an ISA tab, and it needs to validate to this version of this MyAPI, and what other particular community requirements in there. And I'm hearing that sometimes the execution might have been the of a WorkflowRun, in which case you can have a blended profile. So it meets this community definition and it's got the WorkflowRun aspect to it. So all these different profiles in AeroCrate, you can blend them together and they're still well marked. So some tools might only know about WorkflowRun profiles. Great, they'll just access that aspect. You can imagine other tooling that knows more about your community profile, and they may not look so much at the WorkflowRun aspect, or maybe they know that aspect as well. So you can blend these profiles together, because maybe it was manually executed. Well, then there wouldn't be the WorkflowRun provenance information. Because if you have the WorkflowRun provenance, you have start, stop, I use this container. Well, if you're manually running, you don't have that information. You could still meet all your other metadata requirements.
It gives me some thoughts on something I need to play with to have a better idea. I don't know if anybody else has feedback, reaction on that.
Maybe just one question regarding this last sentence here also on the slide. So since this will be replacing CWLProv soon, is there a timeline attached to this that you're currently looking at when the WorkflowRun AeroCrate profile will be the go-to instance for such a provenance building?
Yeah, so CWL itself is currently implemented in the reference runner for CWL, also known as CWL tool.
Sorry, Michael, we have lost the beginning of your sentence. There were a connection failure.
Yeah, I'll repeat. CWLProv is only today implemented in one place in CWL tool, which is the reference implementation of CWL. So it's only execution on single machine. It doesn't distribute jobs. We'll probably keep that for a good long time. What's happening this quarter is I'm implementing RO-Crate WorkflowRun export directly from it. And I see the connection was unstable, so I hope that all that information came through.
I think so, personally.
So the short answer is in the next quarter or two, but CWLProv a while, I don't, maybe we'll keep it for a very long time. I don't know. It was certainly a year or two before it would be moved. There is a converter today, so you can take a CWLProv RO bundle and turn it into a WorkflowRun RO-Crate.
Okay. So CWLProv is deprecated. Nothing will break. Anything new should go to WorkflowRun.
Yeah. If you want to play with it, you can do CWLProv today and run the converter, and know that the same tool that produced that, CWL tool, will, in a number of months, as soon as I get on, also support the WorkflowRun RO-Crate profile. You'll also see support for WorkflowRun RO-Crate profiles from like Galaxy over the next year. I don't know their exact timeline. I know they're working on it.
Of course.
Okay.
I think for people see more information, and I know I'm over time, but if there's any other questions, I'm happy to try again.
I don't see any further questions in the chat. I think my questions were already answered, so I'm inclined to say thank you, Michael, for this talk. And we will resume with the rest of the meeting then.